This video is to make sure you have in your notes the information that you need before we look at some proofs involving parallel lines, because there are some statements and reasons that we need to have available to us in our notes to use when we're looking at proofs in the next few videos. So for the first thing to make sure you have in your notes, which you might already have, are when parallel lines are intersected by a transversal, all the angles formed are reasons we use in our proofs. So for example, alternate interior angles are congruent. So I wrote that 3 would be congruent to 6 and 4 would be congruent to 5 for this figure. Alternate exterior angles are also congruent. So angle 1 would be congruent to angle 8, as 2 would be congruent to 7. And corresponding angles are congruent. So the ones like 1 and 5, 2 and 6, 3 and 7, and 4 and 8 would be congruent to one another. And then same side interior angles add up to 180. We don't use this one as much, but we should make a note of it just in case we need it. So angle 3 plus 5 would be 180, and angle 4 plus 6 would equal 180. Another really important thing to put in your notes are vertical angles are congruent. So anytime in any figure that you have two lines that intersect, the angles across that intersection are congruent. So for this little figure I drew here, they're just two intersecting lines. 1 is congruent to 2, and 3 is congruent to 4. It does not matter at what angle they intersect. We just know they're congruent if they are across the intersection of two lines. Two properties to make sure you have written down are the reflexive property and the transitive property. You may have heard of these before in earlier math classes. Reflexive property is when you have something equal to itself. You'll see in some of the proofs that we look at why this is important to make a note of, because you need this as the reason why you're going to state sometimes that angle 1 is congruent to itself, or segment AB is congruent to segment AB. It also could be stated that segment AB is congruent to segment BA. If you need to reverse the letters, it still means the same thing. The transitive property is stated if A equals B and B equals C, we can conclude that A is equal to C. So make a note of those two. They are ones we use rather often. And then definition of angle bisector is another important one. I drew a little picture of an angle ABC that is bisected by the ray BD. So if we are given that that ray BD bisects angle ABC, they'd have to tell you that that's an angle bisector. We can say that angle ABD is congruent to angle DBC. So we would use that as the reason why we state that those angles are congruent would be definition of angle bisector. And two other small things to put in there that are important in case you need them is a segment bisector. So something like a line that bisects a segment is considered a segment bisector. And so in this picture, AC would be congruent to CB. And very similar to that is the midpoint. So we probably talked about midpoint before now, but if we haven't, you've probably heard of it before now. But if you're given that, for instance, C is the midpoint of segment AB, we can conclude that segment AC is congruent to segment CB by definition of midpoint. So these are some more little ones to write down. And we might add to this list of things that are important, but for now, I think these are what is most important for you to have in your notes before we move forward with proofs.